Okay, let's get right into it. Okay, so hello everyone. Again, I know this was kind of last minute, but welcome to the presentation. This is on a program, I guess, that I'm launching at West LA, Rising Tides. This is our agenda that we'll be going over, the categories for today. And to the people I already presented this to, don't worry, it's not exactly the same. I expanded it since the original version was just focused on faculty and professors. This is also for students. So, hello, my name is Muaawiyah. I'm 18 years old. And before we get into this, why don't we just do like a little round of introductions? What you're studying, or like what department you're with, or what you're a professor of, and just one word for why you showed up today.
Why don't I pause it for this for people's privacy?
All right. So now I wanted to say a little word on why I'm doing this now. And there's four main reasons that that I think are shaping the world that we're inheriting now. Not to depress you, but just to be honest about what we're up against right now. First is that climate collapse is accelerating unchecked. People often talk about it like it's a future issue, but it's affecting people now. Here in California, we're lucky to have a relatively stable and predictable climate, but even now that's starting to change. As we can see with, rainstorms. Like last year, we had a tropical storm that was unprecedented. There have been record wildfires, and it's not a coincidence. The second reason is that young people are isolated. There's a lack of third spaces. There's not really any community centers where you can just exist. There's no spots to hang out and just discuss. And unconnected people can't resist well. If we don't know each other, if we don't trust each other, then we can't build together. Isolated people are easier to control. And the third is that democracy is eroding. Like we're watching the rise of autocracy being promoted to people, and sometimes even by people that we went to high school with. It's like we're in what I would describe as a post-truth era, kind of, where it's like facts don't matter anymore, and it's like less and less people are like actually motivated to find the facts. Like it's, forgive my language, but it's like a shitstorm right now. Like people are being overwhelmed with so much information that they don't even know what to believe sometimes. Fourth is that I believe that immigration enforcement, the brutality with what we're seeing with ICE right now, is normalizing more pervasive state violence. We're being sold an immigration crisis right now, but it's not a crisis of immigrants. It's a crisis of a system that needs cheap labor and scapegoats, and decided that it can have both. Same corporations that exploit, you know, immigrants and their labor fund the politicians who criminalize them. Detention centers, deportation, the separation of families. This is how they keep people afraid and keep people disposable. Oh, and before I move on, I want to ask everyone, or whoever wants to speak, what's one thing that you've seen in your neighborhood or on the news or in your family that made you feel like something is deeply wrong? It doesn't have to be polished, just, something that you witnessed.
Well,
Yeah.
I'll say something. And I'm sure it's not just me, but one thing I see in my neighborhood is a lot of economic disenfranchisement. There's just so much pervasive homelessness and economic instability on many scales too, not just sort of like the sort of general employment scale, but just looking at people's emotions, kind of what you were alluding to as well. There's a sense of despair and disillusionment with people, sort of like a loss of hope. And there's a lot of studies being done about sort of characterizing this time period as being in this moment of civic decay. So I'm not sure how exactly to begin this healing process, but definitely I see this sort of disillusionment within my community, other communities, and the extreme form of homelessness and the sort of daily form of just people not sort of having a sense of direction about how to proceed in their life. And I like what you're bringing to the table, Muaawiyah, in terms of rising tides. One thing I like about rising tides is it tries to sort of link these issues of, environmental degradation and how it intersects with or interplays with all these different social issues that we're talking about, be it xenophobia and immigration, different types of systemic racism, patriarchy. So I like that intersectionality aspect of rising tides.
Thank you, Chris. I really like that point that you brought up about civic decay. It's totally true. I think, or we're seeing young people who are, and just people in general who are, more and more disillusioned with the system, and feel like that it doesn't serve them, rightfully so. And I think that rising tides is a big part of that is showing that, or yeah, showing how we can reclaim power and participation beyond just voting. So thank you for bringing that up. And now a little bit on my story. So I'm not a stranger. Um, so I was born and raised in South LA and South Central LA. I moved around a couple of times throughout that area, but one constant wherever I went was we always lived near some industrial area or some area with oil refineries, or I mean pumps. Inglewood, for example, where I lived for a couple of years, is the largest urban oil field in the United States. And it's also a predominantly, Black and Latino city. And it's no coincidence that, people of color are the ones who are placed near these areas, near industrial zones, highways, oil pumps, to bear the brunt of the impact. Because of this, my grandmother, who is right here holding my older brother, she got cancer linked to environmental related issues, and she unfortunately passed away from it. I never really got to meet her, but from what I've heard about her, I really wish that I did. Because of this, the same issues, my aunt and my grandfather, they were both diagnosed with cancer as well a few years ago. And when that happened, it made me wonder, like, why, basically. So I got into organizing from there. I joined Youth Climate Strike LA following my brother. And what I saw once I got into the, organizing spaces was that Youth Climate Strike LA was one of the few exceptions in being in organization that was actually led by the people on the front lines, especially in the climate space, and not rich kids from who know where's. Granted that climate justice is a global issue, of course, it affects everyone, but it made me question, why aren't the people who are being most impacted the ones leading the fight? And just an overview of what the origin of Rising Tides is. It began as an experiment launched by Youth Climate Strike LA and the Filipino Workers Center. It was designed to address the contradiction and a gap within the nonprofit space and in organizing. It's the failure to develop young people, especially those from frontline communities, their target demographics basically, into capable leaders. Because our communities face, many crises, as we know: climate injustice, immigrant rights, and the erosion of democracy. So if we're to defend our future, we have to invest in young people now. We know that we don't merely inherit society, we institutionalize its values. And Rising Tides exist to ensure that those values are justice, solidarity, and collective power, and to equip youth with the tools in the present to protect their communities and to rebuild a truly democratic society from the ground up. And to introduce Youth Climate Strike LA and PWC, Youth Climate Strike LA is a youth of color led organization that fights for climate justice. We organize from the principle that those who are most impacted by the crisis must lead the solution. Our work connects the dots between environmental and climate disasters, racial injustice, and economic inequality. And the Filipino Workers Center is a grassroots nonprofit that organizes the low wage and immigrant Filipino community in the US. They're all about building collective power to demand better living conditions and working conditions for Filipino people, but all people in the end, to win more dignified working conditions and stable housing. So with that out of the way, a guiding question I have now is, how do we use students' time at community college to prepare them not just for careers, but for civic leadership and systemic change? Because for the most part, our education system does not prepare us to be well-rounded citizens, basically, or to participate in democracy beyond voting or other basic means. And so, what is Rising Tides actually? We focus on education for the most part, with an intersectional focus between race, class, gender, immigration, and ecology, because they have never been separate. An example I want to give of how it's never been separate is, take for example the farm workers movement. Um, During the farm workers movement in, I believe, around the 60s, um, there was the Filipino and Mexican farm workers were two of the main groups, fighting for their rights, because they were both being exploited. So what would happen was that when the Filipino workers went on strike, the employers would just say, okay, we'll just bring in the Mexican workers. And when the Mexican workers went on strike, their employers would say, okay, we'll just bring in the Filipino workers. So they weren't making progress because they weren't united. Their exploiters could just exploit someone else. And so what they did to make ground was to unite and say, we'll strike together. And that's, when they started to make more ground. The second is the Rainbow Coalition and the Black Panther Party philosophy. The Panthers understood that you can't just fight for Black liberation without fighting for all oppressed people. They built alliances with Puerto Ricans, Asians, poor, poor, poor white people, and their Rainbow Coalition because they understood that power doesn't divide us, our exploiters do. And history as well, which I already mentioned in my examples. It's to understand what worked, understanding how times have changed, and understanding what we're fighting, and understanding how the past has built the present. Nothing happens, I would say, in a vacuum or independently. Everything is built on the history of something else. Popular education to link theory to practice and analysis to action. And the core question of this all, or in organizing, is who makes decisions, who holds power, how do they make decisions, why do they make those decisions, who profits off those decisions, who pays for them, and how do we flip the script to start making decisions ourselves. Skills. Rising Tides is definitely about actually gaining skills because theory without practice is, purely theory. It's just talk, basically. So the hard skills that we want people to take away from this and that we will be teaching are campaign planning, community and student organizing skills, power mapping, which is basically seeing who holds power in your community and such, and how you can influence those people. Survival and tech skills, because in the event of a blackout, a flood, a really bad storm, um, you have to know what to do, and that's part of protecting your community. As for soft skills, which are just as important, I would say it's relearning a sense of community responsibility, mutual accountability, learning how to have productive dialogue again, and building trust across our differences. Third, our model is, I think, hybrid meetings because we understand that, in community college, people are, they're often commuting, working, taking care of family. So we understand that people are busy. The model is also about building relationships, sharing stories, and building collective momentum. Because a movement without any connections is very fragile. Another unique thing about its model is that it's designed to connect high school, community college, and university students. We have chapters in Van Nuys High School, in UCLA, and now in West LA, because power is intergenerational. It's across lines or it's nothing. Third, what we're actually going to do. Um, I kind of intended for our first activity or, event to be a social mixer, food conversation, meet other students who are both angry and hopeful, and to start building a community before we build a strategy, because this is an experiment in the end. Interactive tabling would also be, I think, another early activity to, map what students on the campus actually care about through one-on-one discussions, surveys, and, you know, not assuming what people want or think. And monthly discussions, I think, would be a core part of this, with rotating topics on climate, race, discussion, immigration, etc. Come to one or to all of them, invite people, you know. Um, I would, I think that we would have a workshop series to do deeper, like analytical dives into movements, both historical and current, to study their tactics, how they won, so that we can win too, and also learning campaign planning and organizing. Oh, and also putting praxis in practice. I thought because there is a micro forest and different green spaces on campus, I thought that we could tend to them, but through an indigenous lens specifically. Um, my grandmother, she's a Chickasaw Indian, so the principles of indigenous peoples, especially from the Chickasaw Nation, have been, I think, like a guiding north started to me, and also just learning to garden as survival and resistance, and to reclaim what was stolen from us, because more and more of our green spaces are being taken away, transformed into other things that are more profit friendly, and also host trainings on, like, host know your rights trainings regarding ICE, police surveillance, and such, because a lot of people are scared and don't know what to do in those situations. So it's good to know what to do beforehand, even if it's chaotic, a lot of the time unpredictable, and their tactics are changing every day. And also just like general workshops on topics like power mapping and matters like that. We would also want to host like student-led campaigns eventually, and actually putting what we've learned into practice on an issue that we choose when the time comes. We'd be, developing ourselves to be leaders, not just on campus, but in, our own neighborhoods and spaces, because, you know, this isn't an issue that is just for high school, college, or university. And I think that's where a lot of university organizing gets wrong, is that, this is a community issue, not just a student issue. And this is also, building a grassroots or organized network across Los Angeles, between high schools, as I said, colleges and universities, and people from the most impacted communities. Our proposed goals are, in the short term, to launch our pilot chapter and build a core student team. In the long term, like I said, to make a student-led campaign on an issue, and to replicate this across community colleges in Los Angeles, or California, I guess. Our mission and vision is to equip West LA students with the skills, the political education, the trust to build collective power, and to improve our material conditions in our communities. Our vision is a generation of community college students who see themselves as agents of change, who are prepared to lead, vote, organize, and reshape the systems that we live under, with justice at our core. And of course, with all of that said, this is an experiment that's being done in understanding that all of the aforementioned won't be done overnight. But this is being done with the intention of building to scale and proving that community college students are worth being invested in. because traditional organizing often looks over community colleges and sees them as, too hard or too inconvenient to organize. But this is a challenge that I'm willing to take on and something that I'm willing to disprove. And oh, why West LA? As I mentioned, you know, the students at West LA are exactly the kind of demographic that's overlooked by traditional organizing methods and groups. We know the challenges here: working, commuting, being low income, transferring, caring for family. But in the end, these are still the exact people that need to be organized and understand their own power. I want to pause here and ask if anyone has any questions so far or um, insights, agrees with anything. Do you agree with these sentiments? Just etc. If not, we can move on.
One question, actually, if I could ask it. I don't know if anyone else wants to say something. So here's my question, Muaawiyah. You may have said this in our initial session, but in previous iterations of rising tides and how they've worked elsewhere, and you mentioned in these slides interactions with local officials at some point. Can you give examples of that? Like, were these local city council officials or state assembly, state senators? Like, did this actually happen? Is that where sort of the output was made in some instances with other Rising Tides chapters?
Oh
Like,
yeah. So, oh
yeah,
okay.
just like
So
once an issue became understood to be addressed, obviously there's this sort of social activity and organizing around it. So was the final aim to sort of put pressure on elected officials, or how did that turn out?
yeah. So in our first launch of Rising Tides, the like the very beginning of the whole program, it was last summer. During the program, we had a state senator, I believe. I have her name written down somewhere, but I can't recall it at the moment. She's in some of these photos, I think, but basically she was there to give a talk on the power structures in the city and how students can influence them. I Oh yeah, that's her right there. And yeah, the end goal of Rising Tides is to build community and student power so that we can put pressure on our elected officials and also to build our own power inside of our communities, um, which can be used to put pressure on elected officials, but also to like launch our own community initiatives um, for whatever issues you're having in your community. Like if you want to do a trash cleanup, if you want to help your elderly citizens, do mutual aid for people struggling with food. Does that answer your question?
It, no, it does. It does. Because I'm just thinking about, as a political scientist, I'm thinking about logistics too. Like, how do you operationalize social capital on our campus in particular, which is transitioning out of the COVID experience and trying to rebuild a student sort of culture, right, back on campus. And whenever I think about these issues, coming from some of my fellow sociologists, I'm in poli sci, but there's a saying that you have financial capital, right? And how is it depleted? It's depleted when you use it. but social capital is depleted when you don't use it, right? So sort of key to figuring out how to really operationalize rising tides on this campus is keeping the momentum going with keeping people involved in the social aspect. That's why I liked what you said. I think initially one of the first kind of events we should have is just sort of like a mixer before we start sort of setting out agendas and that type of thing, like just to get people to start talking to each other, knowing each other, sharing concerns. I think that'll be sort of key to giving the traction we need to then sort of have meetings that talk about more specific issues, eliciting or figuring out what people were concerned about, that type of stuff. And then down the line, actually training and having workshops on skill sets and different skill sets that need to be refined to be effective change agents and things of that nature. Um, but no, it totally answered the question. It's just my mind sort of thinking in all these different directions. Carry on.
Okay, are you on over? Okay, and now, how everyone can help. First, to our, faculty and professors, we ask for support in advisory roles to, lend your academic insight and your institutional connections to us. We would also like to explore pathways for participation recognition, just to provide a little incentive to those who might be kind of interested in it. First, and also student referrals. This is the most immediate help. Is to encourage students from sociology, environmental studies, ethnic studies, political science, etc., to join us. And to students, also referrals if you think anyone is interested. But come to a social, join a workshop. See what it's about. Bring a friend. Shape it. Join the core team. Help build this from the ground up because your voices will literally shape what this becomes. And to lead it because that's what this is about is making leaders. On that note, right now, as I said, one of our short-term goals right now is to build a core team of students. So if you guys are interested in that, or if anyone is interested, or if you think anyone would be interested in this, just reach out and to in and discuss because I wanted to save a lot of time for discussion. I guess to kind of start off the conversation, I want to ask, do you guys see rising tides meeting some of the gaps you as students or your your students as professors have? And also, do you have any ideas or insights on this? And what do you think about this in general? Do you think it's a good idea? You think it could use more polishing? Just you can answer any of those questions you like, but I want this to be a discussion for all of us.